USCHO.com. This is the USCHO Spotlight, a weekly podcast from U.S. College Hockey Online at USCHO.com, featuring conversations with college hockey coaches and players and journalists who cover the sport.
Welcome to USCHO Spotlight for Tuesday, February 9th, 2021. I'm Ed Trefzger alongside Jim Connelly. Jim, since the rearrangement of college hockey after the advent of the Big Ten, no league has been more successful in the postseason than the NCHC.
And joining us on this week's USCHO Spotlight, the commissioner of the NCHC is Josh Fenton. Josh, first off, great to have you with us. And tell us a little bit about what you're going to do in your postseason. You announced that on Monday, a little bit of a change to the normal, but in a kind of a strange year, you need to be able to make some changes.
Yeah, first off, thanks for having me, guys. Good to be with you as always. We announced a slight change, or I should say more than a slight change, a change to our postseason structure, where we're going to change a couple things. We're going to change the format. Typically, we're playing best of three in the quarterfinal round, where all 8 teams are making the postseason. The winners move on to St. Paul and XL Energy Center for our Frozen Faceoff, 2 semifinals and a championship. So we're going to go down to single elimination in the quarterfinal round. And at this point, we're keeping the same kind of matchup alignment: 1 versus 8, 2 versus 7, 3 versus 6, 4 versus 5. And then the winners will meet in 2 semifinals. And then obviously the winners of the semifinals will meet in the championship. And then from a location standpoint, typically we're on the campus sites for that quarterfinal round. And then, as I said, we moved to St. Paul. Just the circumstances of trying to go into 4 different campus sites and potentially 4 different states, depending on where those could be located, and then having 4 teams then travel to St. Paul, Minnesota, with some, restrictions across the state of Minnesota, just make it a little challenging. And so we're going to play the entire tournament in Ralph Engelstad Arena, obviously home of the University of North Dakota. And so we're very grateful to them for opening up their doors and allowing us to host our tournament in their building.
Josh, most people know by now that you and the NCHC began the season in a pod in Omaha, and all 8 teams there. You played over 21 days, either 9 or 10 games per team. Very successful from all accounts. How similar is this postseason to what you accomplished in Omaha? Will it still have the pod qualities of kind of isolation and the ability to keep the players safe, or does it change a little bit with not just the venue but the circumstance here?
Well, I think it's similar in many ways, and I think it's very different in many ways. As you referenced, safety. Ultimately, that's our top priority: is keeping the participants, teams, officials, staff safe. And so there'll be protocols that'll be put in place, like utilizing just a limited number of hotels and trying to put multiple teams into just a couple hotels. And so things like that will be in place. Our masking policy, our dining out or no dining in policy, those types of things will be in place. And then we'll have a testing regimen that will obviously allow us to pick up any issue if there is an issue regarding somebody that may have contracted the virus. And so, measures like that will be very similar to the pod will be in place. But then there's massive differences. And one of the biggest things is we intend at this point to allow spectators into the venue, albeit on a limited basis, in a physically distanced way within the venue, still wearing masks, all that type of thing. And so in the pod in Omaha, we really had the entire venue to ourselves. There was a handful of scouts each and every night. There was a handful of media members that were there, but by and large, it was basically just the teams, the officials, and the staff. And so that part of it is going to be very different. And so similarities, but differences. But ultimately, the safety of everybody is priority number one. And I think we'll have measures in place to keep everybody safe.
I think some of the wisdom of doing the pod has been proven with some of the COVID protocols you've had to deal with around the league since then. What has that taken for the teams and the league office for managing rescheduling and things like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think we knew that we weren't going to be immune to postponements and COVID issues that came up amongst teams or others that impacted games. And that's exactly what's happened, unfortunately. But, like I said, we're not unique in that regard. We believe that the way in which we set our schedule up, Ed, has allowed us to continue to push forward and still at this point today have all games on the schedule that were originally scheduled. Some of them have been moved around. We've had to use some of the makeup dates, but that's why we built the flexibility into the schedule. We had 3 open weekends in the second half to allow for makeups, and like I said, we've had to use them. And so I think really the schedule creation is probably the biggest thing that's allowed us to kind of stay on task, and everybody hopefully can get through it based on what we've scheduled. But we certainly have seen our fair share of issues, and that's not I guess to be expected, and very different than the pod, because we're going into regular travel mode, and teams are staying in different hotels, and they're going from their campus to different locations. So just more variables that just make it harder to prevent virus transmission.
Last week on this podcast, we were talking with UConn head coach Mike Cavanaugh, and he said he thought there were some positive or maybe useful things that have been learned from dealing with COVID that might go forward, maybe matinee game times and some of the protocols. Do you see some positive things or some useful things that the NCHC has learned in dealing with this?
Yeah, I think just the general medical protocols that have been put in place, I think a lot of that probably carries over. I don't know, and I guess I hope that we're not in some type of regular testing regimen, but in terms of just general precautions about hygiene and, even mask wearing and distancing and separating, fans from participants, that type of thing. I think that's all good practices. As it relates to the schedule and kind of what Cav is referencing there, I do think it's opened our eyes up to, our ability to be flexible with the schedule, and realize that, our schedule doesn't have to be so regimented, and, maybe we have the ability to make changes during the year. I don't know that that's not what anybody necessarily wants, but opening up different game times to get different game days. Our conference is different than Hockey East. Hockey East has got a big advantage because of geography, where they can move easily from one member to the next. We just don't have that. And so, we have to get creative. We had to get creative when we put our schedule together, which is why we created 2 divisions and the pod, and then a unique schedule in the second half. But yeah, I think there's some things that maybe we can look at regarding game days and times that may be applicable moving forward.
Over the past few years, you've been a big advocate for the 3-on-3 overtime. And I have to admit, at first I was a bit skeptical, especially after it following a 5-on-5. But probably even the most hardened skeptic has to agree that it's been pretty much of a success this year. How do you feel about seeing 3-on-3 implemented and how it's played out so far?
Well, I think we've been on the record about this for a while. We really enjoy 3-on-3. We think first and foremost for the players, they really enjoy it. I realize that when one team loses and the other team, one team wins and the other team loses, it's you have joyous occasion on one side and kind of a down occasion on the other side. But I know the players really enjoy kind of playing in that environment. It's usually end-to-end action, fast pace, a lot of high skill plays being made on the ice. A lot of big time saves made by goaltenders. And so, we've got a responsibility to provide great experiences for our student athletes. And I think 3-on-3 gives them that. And then obviously for the fans, I think the fans are enjoying watching that skill on the ice surface. And so, we think it's worked across the country like it's been working in the NCHC for many years now. And I think it's good that we've moved right from regulation to 3-on-3 overtime, and the game has been shortened in that way. So that's certainly been a positive thing. And we welcome that in our conference.
More with NCHC Commissioner Josh Fenton in a moment.
This is the USCHO Spotlight, a weekly podcast from US College Hockey Online.
USCHO Spotlight continues with NCHC Commissioner Josh Fenton. A few weeks ago, you mentioned some selection criteria for the NCAAs that you would like the committee to consider, and that is allocating a number of at-large bids based on historical criteria across the conferences going back to the beginning of the NCHC. Even right now today, as we look, there are 4 NCHC teams in the top 10 of the USCHO.com Division I men's ice hockey poll, which would kind of lend some support to your argument. But how do you make the case for that, and how would you suggest that the committee look at that?
Well, first off, let me start and say that I've got a ton of respect for the 6 members that serve on the committee and the NCAA staff that helps with that committee. I know their job this year in just kind of constructing the tournament from a format standpoint, even some of the locations, and then down into the selections is nothing like that we've ever seen in a long time, or maybe ever. And so they've got a hard task at hand, but I believe that they will get us to a good outcome, whatever method it is that they use for selections. Yeah, I've said in the past that I think it's very challenging to look at-large selections just purely based upon subjectivity, especially when we have very few cross-conference competitions occurring. You know, in our conference, we've played none. I don't believe Hockey East has played any. The Big Ten hasn't played any other than their scheduling arrangement with Arizona State, which is unique in and of itself. And then there's been, I know, a few limited ones that have occurred across other conferences. And so if I took you back 15, 20 years when selections were made based upon subjectivity, you at least had cross-conference competition to say, okay, how does this conference compare to that conference? We don't even have that this year. And so I think there's challenges just in looking at just a subjective measure and listing teams on a piece of paper and saying, okay, this team's better than that team, when they don't have any sort of comparable data, so to speak, across the conferences. I guys, to be honest with you, I vote in the USA Hockey to a poll every Monday morning. I send my poll to Joe Britannia, and I try to do my best, but I myself are not really sure on maybe how some of those teams are that I don't see real often. And so, you're kind of going off of maybe what the sentiment of the poll was from the previous week, and then I guess looking at the results right there and then. And I think as the committee kind of decides to select teams for the tournament, they're going to find the same challenges. I just think it's really hard to do that. So the thought was that maybe we could use some level of historical data to add some quantifiable pieces to the selection process. And whether it's a percentage of teams that each conference has had in years past, which is probably the way in which they'd have to look at it, because the ECAC obviously only has 4 teams that are competing this year. I think that at least gives it some quantifiable result. And if you want to go all the way back to when the Big Ten and the NCHC had their first season, I would say go back as far as you want. I fully understand, respect, and realize that this year, a team this year is not the same team that it was last year or in years past. I'm just trying to think through how to normalize this for the committee and add quantifiable aspects to it. And so I don't know what they're going to do. I haven't really heard and I haven't had much conversation. But it was just a concept that we threw out there as a possibility.
Josh, we've seen a lot of attempted growth throughout college hockey. Obviously, Long Island University, there's a lot of rumors of other programs. I think St. Thomas is going to try to come in. Obviously, Arizona State, they're still looking for home. When you look at room for growth, I know we've asked you this pretty much every year we talk to you, but do you see room for growth within the NCHC if your conference were to find a team that they felt was a geographic or a right fit?
Well, I think it comes down to, when you're talking about membership generally, it comes down to value and what adds value to the existing membership structure. I think, a lot of this conversation has probably been put on the sideline recently because we've been trying to just get through the year and deal with the challenges that have been brought before us because of the pandemic. But will there be conversations that pick up because we have new programs that are adding, and hopefully we continue to have new institutions start the program in the future? I think there will be opportunities to have those discussions. I think we have a responsibility to college hockey overall, and I say that the NCHC plus all of us together, to ensure that our sport is strong and that it's healthy and it's thriving into the future. And one of the aspects to that is, I suppose, conference alignments. And so I don't think it's just an NCHC discussion. I don't think it's, just another particular conference discussion. I think it's an all of college hockey discussion. There's maybe a little bit of regionality based upon West and East. But I think, as you referenced, Jim, new programs coming in, and not having conferences and us in college hockey trying to figure out where the pieces fit in the puzzle, we've got a responsibility to at least have that discussion and try to do what's best, not only for our conferences, but the game overall. So I just know that there hasn't, at least in our world, hasn't been a lot of discussion about that, just because of the pandemic and challenges of the current year. But I certainly could see it picking back up in the future.
Josh, we've talked so much about just the kind of the structure of college hockey and those sort of things. We haven't even talked about the on-ice product. And right now, your conference has some great races going on. North Dakota, Minnesota, Duluth, St. Cloud, all separated by 2 points. And when you put percentage points in there, they're even closer, it seems, in the standings. You're going to have a very good race here to get toward the end of the regular season and crown a regular season champion.
Yeah, I think it's playing out like the NCHC race typically plays out, which is tight all the way into the end. We've only had a year or two where there's been some separation there, and so we're certainly seeing that again this year in a very unique year. But it's making it very exciting as we get to the end. So, we've got a little bit difference in the number of games that have been played by some teams, and that's just based upon how the schedule's been set up and COVID issues and makeups and reschedules that maybe haven't yet occurred yet. So we'll see how it plays out here over the last few weeks, but it's certainly going to be exciting as we get down to the first part of March.
Do you feel confident you'll have everybody with the same number of games played at the end of the season?
That's a great question. I would love to give you I feel really confident about that, but Jim, I don't know in this world today that I should be saying that, because I could get a call after I hang up with you guys telling me that they have a COVID issue that's going to knock them out for a week or 2 weeks. So, right now we feel good about where we are. Everybody's played a similar number of games. And like I said, we have a plan to complete all the games that were scheduled. Whether we get to that point, we're going to need some luck because it's somewhat out of our hands, as it relates to the virus and issues that can easily disrupt a team. So we'll see, but we're hopeful.
Well, it has been a strange year. Everybody acknowledges that, but I give you and your staff and all of your 8-member institutions a lot of credit for being flexible and finding creative solutions to get this season played. So Josh Fenton, as always, thanks for your time. Best of luck the rest of the way. We'll be hopefully catching up at some time in the future this season.
Great. Thanks for having me, guys. Appreciate it.
That's the commissioner of the NCHC, Josh Fenton. Jim, you have to take your hat off for, I think, the most important thing that Josh Fenton brings to the overall picture of college hockey, and that's being foresighted.
Certainly, and maybe we've always kind of understood that he's a great thinker, outside of this season, before this season, always was kind of at the forefront, as you mentioned, on 3-on-3 overtime. Even some of the big NCAA legislation like name, image, likeness, I know he's been very much on top of it. Whenever I've needed somebody to explain it to me, I've called on Josh Fenton. He's sharp. He really does have a kind of an analytical mind. In this season, obviously, the NCHC took some chances that no other league took. None of the leagues in the country, even thought about, or maybe thought about it, but they didn't venture into a pod situation. And what they accomplished in Omaha was amazing. And they're going to try to do something relatively similar. And I was glad that Josh pointed out that it's not exactly, a pod / bubble that they'll be doing during the playoffs. If you have fans involved it's a little bit different. And, when they were in Omaha and having talked to people like Brad Schlossman and other people that were there, it was very isolated. This does not feel like it will be as isolated, the playoffs, but it still will be done in a safe way and hopefully in a quick way. That's a big part of what these postseason tournaments, you may only get a small window where teams are really healthy. Get them out on the ice, get them playing games in that time frame, and hopefully in a 6-day window, just 4 days on the ice, you can play these championships and get them decided. That is the biggest challenge every league is facing, and I think the Big Ten and now the NCHC have taken this approach. I think it is the right one to take. Get everybody in one city, get the tournament done.
Something that Josh Fenton mentioned that I've talked to other people about is maybe changing in some of the medical and maybe sanitary, for a lack of a better term, protocol. Every season, it seems like every team in college hockey has a period where some kind of a stomach flu or something like that runs through the team. Now with the carefulness with towels and water bottles and things like that, disinfecting around the benches, maybe some of that will stick around and maybe cause less of that sort of a transmission of disease around teams. Maybe that's something that comes out of this.
Yeah, I think, Ed, if we can improve hygiene in sports, and it's not just hockey, it's across all of the sports, and the way that, even I as a human realize I've been horrible my entire life about making sure that, you even just your hands are clean, that you're not touching things that you don't need to be touching, that you don't put stuff into your mouth or up to your eyes or your nose. All of the awareness that we have brought, I hope that this doesn't get lost when COVID goes away. Over time, I'm sure it will. It's a human nature. But if we could improve some of the medical end of athletics, college athletics, then I think that we will have less teams, feeling like they are just, shorthanded, putting 16 guys on the ice because everybody else has the stomach flu. It happens every year. If we can lessen that, I think that we've taken a nice step forward.
Well, we do appreciate Josh Fenton's time for this podcast. For Jim Connelly, I'm Ed Trefzger, and we'll catch you next time.
This has been the USCHO Spotlight, a production of U.S. College Hockey Online. Visit uscho.com/podcasts to listen or subscribe.